As we continue on this path of discovery or rediscovery of Sabbath, perhaps one of the greatest gifts that God has given us and is ingrained in us, has been ingrained in us since the beginning, and yet we have too long neglected. I invite you to hear these words from the prophet Isaiah. Shout out, do not hold back. Lift up your voice like a trumpet. Announce to my people their rebellion, to the house of Jacob their sins. Yet day after day they seek me and delight to know my ways, as if they were a nation that practiced righteousness and did not forsake the ordinance of their God. They ask of me righteous judgments. They delight to draw near to God. Why do we fast, but you do not see? Why humble yourselves, but you do not notice? Look, you serve your own interest on your fast day and oppress all your workers. Look, you fast only to quarrel and to fight and to strike with a wicked fist. Such fasting as you do today will not make your voice heard on high. Is such the fast that I choose, a day to humble oneself? Is it to bow down the head like a bulrush and to lie in sackcloth and ashes? Will you call this a fast, a day acceptable to the Lord? Is not this fast that I choose, to loose the bonds of injustice, to undo the thongs of the yoke, to let the oppressed go free, and to break every yoke? Is it not to share your bread with the hungry, and bring the homeless poor into your house? When you see the naked, to cover them, and not to hide yourself from your own kin? Then your light shall break forth like the dawn, and your healing shall spring up quickly. Your vindicator shall go before you. The glory of the Lord shall be your rear guard. Then you shall call, and the Lord will answer. You shall cry for help, and he will say, Here I am. If you remove the yoke from among you, the pointing of the finger, the speaking of evil, if you offer your food to the hungry and satisfy the needs of the afflicted, then your light shall rise in the darkness, and your gloom be like the noonday. The Lord will guide you continually and satisfy your needs in parched places and make your bones strong, and you shall be like a watered garden, like a spring of water whose waters never fail. Your ancient ruins shall be rebuilt. You shall raise up the foundations of many generations. You shall be called the repairer of the breach, the restorer of streets to live in. If you refrain from trampling the Sabbath, from pursuing your own interests on my holy day, if you call the Sabbath a delight and the holy day of the Lord honorable, if you honor it, not going your own ways, serving your own interests, or pursuing your own affairs, then you shall take delight in the Lord. And I will make you ride upon the heights of the earth. I will feed you with the heritage of your ancestor Jacob. For the mouth of the Lord has spoken. The word of the Lord. Let us pray. God, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of all of our hearts this day be a delight to you. Amen. Most of us think that our jobs are the most difficult and stressful when we're doing them. I was in the 5th grade when I got my first job. My family was living for a season in Germany with my aunt and uncle. My uncle owned several businesses for the American military. And so my job was to go onto those military bases and into the military housing and put flyers for his businesses in every single mail slot in these giant apartment buildings. I made about $3 an hour, and I'll be honest, I took my own sweet time. It was difficult for a 10-year-old, and I hated that job. Or the job I once had setting up casino tables for private parties, and then waiting for the party to end at about 3 o'clock in the morning, so I could then go back and take down the casino tables and load them into a truck and then unload them into a warehouse. That job was very short-lived. Or you've heard about the 7-day-a-week, 15-hour-a-day, 2-month stint I spent in an Alaskan salmon cannery. Difficult, awful, unforgiving job that was. Or the job I once had during college, selling Christmas trees on a Christmas tree lot in Seattle. Maybe that doesn't sound too rough. But not only did I get to sell Christmas trees, but I got to do it while dressed up as Santa Claus. Doesn't that sound fun? It sure wasn't at all. Most of us think our jobs are the most difficult jobs and stressful jobs when we're doing them. And there are some pretty tough and demanding jobs in this world, like being a farmer or a firefighter or a police officer or search and rescue or president or a sanitation worker or an Alaskan crab fisherman or prison worker, a mortician, a landmine remover. Yes, that is a job, just to name a few. But there is another job that I think is more difficult than all of those. It's the job of being a prophet. It may be tempting to think, what a serene job prophets have, speaking on behalf of God, God's mouthpiece, and how their lives were filled with love and acceptance and understanding. Until we remember that people really haven't been that good at listening, let alone listening to God. You and I can easily avoid the prophets. We can ignore them. If we start to feel unsettled or threatened or ashamed or embarrassed, we can just bypass them and go straight to Jesus, because what a friend we have in Jesus, right? We don't always have a friend in the prophet. Prophets rock back and forth between judgment and promise. Judgment and promise. And it's hard to know how to live in that space when there's someone constantly barking at you about it. The prophets did not have an easy job. The ultimate aim of a prophet, though, which is also the ultimate difficulty of the job itself, is to wake people up to God, to wake people up to who God is, what God has done, what God is doing, and what God will do. If that's not difficult enough, it means that a prophet also needs to be somewhat awake to God himself or herself. And here is the prophet Isaiah trying to wake people up to God. A people who are questioning God's silence despite their prayers. It reminds me of, perhaps you've seen Martin Scorsese's film Silence, based on the 1966 novel of the same name, which tells the story of two Christian missionaries who face the ultimate test of faith when they go to Japan in search of their missing mentor, at a time in Japan when Christianity was outlawed and their presence was forbidden. And at one point, one of the missionaries says, "I pray, but I am lost. Am I just praying to silence?" This is how the people of Israel were feeling, that they were praying to silence. And what is thought of as the silence of God, though, is often mistaken for the deafness of humanity. You see, the people have been in exile, and they want restoration. They want wholeness and peace. They want justice in their lives and in the world around them. They want all that God has promised them. But it's not all up to God, because there's going to be some struggle after they return to restore the city of Jerusalem, their home, and to restore their lives in ways that are faithful. And take a wild guess at the key ingredient in restoring lives that are faithful. Sabbath. Delighting in the Sabbath. refraining from their own agendas and delighting in the way of life God created for them. Which means stop listening to themselves long enough so they can actually listen for God. It may be that silence isn't all that bad after all. It may actually be in the silence when and where God speaks. And so the people say they are seeking God. They say they're going after God through their worship. But Isaiah says, wait a minute, hold on. Let's talk about what it really means to worship. Is worship about us? Is worship about being entertained? Is worship about having our own agendas fulfilled or our own expectations being met? No, no, and no. Every week, souls and bodies gather in this designated space, this sanctuary for worship, with its creaky wooden pews and worn cushions and a pipe organ choir and cross facing you, a piano and drums and a guitar, a baptismal font, a pulpit, a communion table at the center of it all. All the while, we're surrounded by stained glass windows that are essentially telling the story of what it means to be awake to God. And perhaps we come with great feelings of suspense, or maybe we come with the same deep hopes for salvation. Maybe we come with a sense of wonder at what may actually happen or transpire over the course of this hour or so. Or maybe we come with the same low expectations, and so maybe we sit in the back so we don't have to pay as close attention. I'm not picking on you guys, don't worry. God forbid, though, that we ever sit in the front pews. Do we experience God or do we experience ourselves in worship? Isaiah calls for a God experience, not an experience of ourselves. God's been calling for that for a while, hence why God keeps bringing up Sabbath. Day after day they seek me, God says through Isaiah, and delight to know my ways as if they were a nation that practiced righteousness. They delight to draw near to me, God says, yet they serve their own interests and oppress all their workers. Is this the kind of day that is acceptable to me? Is not the worship I choose to fight injustice, to let the oppressed go free? Is not your bread to be shared with the hungry? God asks. And the homeless to be welcomed into your house, to cover with clothing those who don't have any? If you remove your own agendas, God says, the pointing of fingers, the speaking of evil on this day of worship, your light will rise in the darkness. I will guide you and satisfy your needs in parched places and make your bones strong, and you shall be like a watered garden, like a spring of water whose waters never fail. Your ancient ruins shall be rebuilt. The foundations of your generations shall be raised up, and the streets will be restored. What I'm saying, God says, is that all of the ritual activity doesn't mean anything unless it does something. Justice. Yes, sure, all lives matter, God says. But haven't I told you how deeply I care about the issues and causes around you? Now, I'm not only going to tell you again, and I'll keep telling you through these prophets who have a really difficult job, I might add. But I will show you soon enough through the Messiah, God says. And even though this Messiah will love everyone, even to the point of going to the cross, he will go out of his way, this Messiah, to intentionally help specific groups of people, the alienated, the mistreated, and those facing injustice. He will make it very clear that all lives matter, yes. But he will also say how Samaritan lives matter, how children's lives matter, how Gentile lives matter, how Jewish lives matter, how women's lives matter, how lepers' lives matter, how tax collectors' lives matter. He will intentionally, purposefully, and passionately address very specific political, social, and racial issues. He will help those who are being abused, violated, and oppressed. He will radically address the diverse and complicated conflicts of the time, and in so doing, will shatter the status quo. That's what justice looks like, God says. And this Messiah, he'll do all of that because, well, he is me, and I am him. And I have promised justice, wholeness, shalom. In the meantime, though, God says, because you're not all that great at listening, especially in the silence, if you refrain from trampling the Sabbath, from pursuing your own interests on this holy day, says God, if you call the Sabbath a delight, if you honor it, not going your own ways or serving your own interests, then you shall take delight in me, and I will make you ride upon the heights of the earth. Friends, I don't have the difficult job of being a prophet. Thanks be to God. But I do have the difficult yet incredibly beautiful job of helping lead a church, a community of faith, and helping you, these people, myself, wake up to something beautiful. And that something beautiful is the delight of the Sabbath. Even though we keep trampling on it, we can't really escape the beautiful place of the Sabbath. It is there in God's Sabbath where real participation with God happens, where we see how God chooses not distance from us, but intimate communion with us. If we can refrain from our own agendas and trampling on everything in our way, we actually wake up to who God is and the justice that God is about through us. It is in delighting in the Sabbath where something like Isaiah says actually happens. How light rises in the darkness and our bones are made strong and we're made like a watered garden, and where God rebuilds and restores us. That is justice. And that kind of justice, though, is far bigger, far wider, far more expansive than just you and me or the people in this place. So may the trampling, the crushing, the flattening, the squashing stop. May we be invited to stop trampling on this holy day. And may we be invited into a delight, the savoring, the valuing, the enjoying of who God is and what God has done, is doing, and will do for us. May we continue to wake up to God.